Hi and welcome to the Journalism Salute. I'm Mark Simon. In each episode, we'll talk to or about an interesting person or organization related to journalism. The intent is to show that journalists are not the enemy of the people. Thank you for listening. On this episode, we're joined by Pete Croatto. Pete is a longtime journalist, and his writing spans a wide variety of subjects. He's both a part-time copy editor and a freelance writer. He's written for the New York Times, The Athletic, the Poynter Institute, among many other places. For example, if you do a Google search, it immediately brings up articles for Shondaland and Next Avenue, a website for seniors. And he wrote a book about the NBA. Hey, Pete, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Mark.
All right, so we ask the same question of you that we ask of everybody. What's your journalism origin story?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's funny. I started wanting to be a movie reviewer, and so the first time I remember wanting to be a writer and not in the traditional sense, in more of the journalism sense, was my grandfather had died. This is in '89, and he had a giant collection of books in his basement in Queens, Bayside. So every so often, my family would visit my grandmother. We'd go through the basement, root through the books. He was there, and one of the trips down the stairs, I remember coming across a collection of Roger Ebert's movie reviews. I think it was the '85 movie video handbook. And I read that because I like movies, and I knew Roger Ebert from the television, from I guess at the movies or sneak previews, whatever it was back then. And I just fell in love with the writing. I fell in love with how he expressed himself, and the fact that he was in very simple language expressing very powerful ideas about beauty and film and a visual medium. It was an eye opener. But I think in terms of being a journalist, I really think that being at TCNJ, the College of New Jersey, which is our shared alma mater, that really opened my eyes because I had a couple of great journalism professors there, and Kim Pearson and Dr. Bob Cole, who were just very experienced and very encouraging and very, very good at what they as journalists and as teachers. And it was infectious. And then luckily being able to write for the Trenton Times for a couple of years in college, doing a lot of general assignment stuff, just really made me fall in love with reporting and with journalism. Though it took me a while to really fall back into that love. But yeah, but it was about a 10-12 year process of just kind of learning, falling in love with writing, different kinds of writing, and going from there.
Was there anything in your heritage or upbringing, we always ask this as well, from the before times that would have lent itself to telling stories?
Yeah, I mean, my parents are both voracious readers. My mom was an editor, was a book editor in New York for a couple of years. Uh, I forget the name of the publishing house, but it wasn't one of the big five. It wasn't like HarperCollins uh, or Simon and Schuster, but she was an editor for a couple of years. And my parents were both, and still are, voracious readers. I mean, my dad is consumes a lot of nonfiction, a lot of Jewish history. He's really big into Judaism, even though we're not Jewish. And my mom is loves fiction. I mean, she turned me on to Philip Roth and Tyler. My dad also turned me on to a lot of humorists like Gene Shepard, Woody Allen. So they always were, they were big time readers. And they also encouraged me to read and to write professionally, even though they were not in that field. Like my dad was a contractor for a number of years, and my mom helped him run his business before she became an administrative assistant for Bank of America. So they were not journalists by trade, but in terms of their reading habits, their curiosity, they were definitely journalists, and they couldn't have been more supportive, and they're still supportive. So it was a really good fit. I couldn't have asked for a better upbringing.
And essentially an inherited trait. So you mentioned Queens, you mentioned College of New Jersey. Just where are you from and where are you now?
Let's see. Well, I was born in Madison, Indiana. I spent 2 years there. My dad got a job out there, so my parents moved from New York. They had lived in Queens. Where did they live? But they lived, I don't know what neighborhood, but they lived from Queens. They moved to Indiana. And then in 1979, my dad got another job back east. So we all moved back east. And I lived in central New Jersey, Aberdeen, which is about 40 minutes outside of New York City for about 20 years. And so, yeah, that was my upbringing. So now I'm actually in my parents' house right now. I know that this is not, I don't think this is a video podcast, but I'm in the spare bedroom in Aberdeen, New Jersey, but I live just outside of Ithaca, New York,
Got-
and I've been there since 2015.
Gotcha. So you graduated college in 2000. I
Yes.
know that this is a lengthy answer, but that's all right. Explain the circumstances that led to you being a freelancer.
Oh God, how much time do you have? I mean, it's a
Let's get the
very
5-minute version.
okay. The 5 minute version. All right. So after I graduated TCNJ, I desperately wanted to become. I desperately wanted to work in newspapers, and I wanted to write for a career. The ultimate goal being, okay, well, I'll be a movie reviewer like Roger Ebert. Okay, so I graduate in 2000 and I get a job at the Courier News in Bridgewater, New Jersey, which is a Gannett paper. I was a beat reporter there, and I hated every minute of it. Hated every minute. It was just, I think it was for a number of reasons that are too painful to go into. It was just a really bad fit. It was a lot. It was a gothic amount of work, and I wasn't ready for it emotionally. There was no support system in place really to teach or to instruct, and I just sank like a stone. So I left there after about a year, just with my tail between my legs, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I'm not cut out for this." So then in 2003, I got back into the journalism game. I wound up working for a trade magazine in East Brunswick, New Jersey, uh, called VRM Inc., which covers the supplements, vitamins, things like that. Did that for close to 4 years, which is probably about 3 years longer than I should have been there. It was very instructive. I learned a lot. Learned how to write long stories, how to deal with sources. But it was just to put it in perspective. We had an editorial staff of three, one production person, and we put out 28 issues a year of magazines. That's more than Rolling Stone. That's always the comparison I use. Like Rolling Stone comes out bi-weekly, and they have an editorial staff of, I don't know, dozens, freelancers, contract workers. We had none of that. So it was the four of us putting together a magazine, 20 years of a magazine. And I was burning out. I was miserable, and was I was close to turning 30, and I felt that I wasn't doing anything that I wanted to do as a writer. And I was miserable at my job. And I decided, all right, you know what? I'm going to leave this job, which I probably should have left about 2 years ago. And going to job working at Borders, which was right across the street from me. And I'm going to freelance and I'll see how I do. And that's how it got started. And I found that I loved working for myself. I loved writing, having the choice to write what I wanted to write. And I really haven't looked back. That was 2006. So there have been some bumps along the way, and I've learned a hell of a lot. But that was what got me started, was leaving that job and deciding that I wanted to write for myself. And it worked out really, really well. And I have absolutely no regrets about that.
So I mentioned that you're also a copy editor, and freelancing is
Mm-hmm.
going to be the main subject here.
Sure,
But
sure.
just briefly explain what your copy editing work is.
Yeah, I mean, I edit 5 days a week, 4 hours a day for a major magazine, just editing their blog posts, editing contributors. The site has a number of contributors who provide write-ups based on aggregated content and original stories. So my job is just to edit it, shape it, make sure that it's factually accurate, copy edit, fact check it. I like it. I compare it to taking swings in a batting cage. Keeps me sharp, keeps my writing sharp. And the people I've worked with are lovely. So, and I've had the same client for almost 20 years. So it's a steady gig. It pays very well, and I enjoy it. And it frees me up to do other things, to pursue, do the Q&As for Shondaland, to write features for the New York Times or other publications. So it's really it's an ideal situation. And as a freelancer, I think it's important to have an anchor gig, especially one where you interact with other people, other employees. That's crucial because again, I mean, I'm by myself. There's no support staff, so it can so instead of so that job not only keeps me busy, it pays steadily. I work with people I like, but it keeps me from turning to Jack Nicholson from The Shining. So it's a good situation, and I'd recommend that for any freelancer to try and find that kind of steady gig that is not mentally taxing, that isn't a burden or a bane in your mind every night when you go to bed, but that keeps you busy and keeps you occupied. It's I find that's pretty important.
You have your anchor gig, but your freelancing
Yeah.
is all over the map. Just to run through a few things, these are some that you actually shared with me that you've done recently. You did a
Hmm.
Q&A with former New York Giants coach Tom Coughlin about life changes for a senior website. You did another with filmmaker Lizzie Gottlieb about a movie about her father and the writer Robert Caro. You wrote about what was
Yep.
essentially the lacrosse equivalent of Babe Ruth becoming the commissioner of Major League Baseball, a lacrosse player
Yeah,
at
that's
Johns
correct.
Hopkins, who now runs a new lacrosse league, that for the
Yeah.
school's alumni MAC. You did a solutions journalism piece for the New Jersey School Boards Association website on teaching
Hmm.
digital citizenship, and you just did another sports piece. You reminisced about baseball cards with an artist who did paintings for them for the website Defector. How do you come up with all these ideas?
Some of those ideas were provided to me. The New Jersey School Board Association piece was assigned by a TCNJ alumnus, Tom Parmalee, who now edits that magazine, School Leader. Let's see. That was School Board Association that was assigned. Lizzie Gottlieb was something I came up with. So was Tom Coughlin. It happens a variety of ways. Like I will get press releases with interview opportunities from various lists that I'm on that I've accumulated over the years. And sometimes I'll think, what, that could be a good Q&A possibility. Let me pitch that to Pointer. Let me pitch that to Shondaland, or let me pitch that to whomever. So that's the case with the Q&As. Paul Raybill, the lacrosse legend, that was there. I got that gig because there was a call for pitches on Twitter. No, actually, no, pardon me. The editor, Greg Renzi, who edits John Hopkins Alumni Magazine, said, "Oh, I'm looking for a sports writer. Does anyone know anybody?" So I raised my hand and said, "I can cover sports. I'm a sports writer. That's me. I can do that." So that worked out really well. And and Defector was interesting because that was written with my brother Dave, who was a longtime editor at Mad Magazine, about Dick Perez, who created the Diamond Kings with Dick Steele, who's
Frank Steele, yeah.
a late, yeah, sorry about that, the late Philadelphia entrepreneur and sports lover. So yeah, Dave had that idea. He tried pitching it, landed someplace. Time passed, so he said, "Hey, can you pitch it somewhere?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll help you write it," and I pitched it to Defector, where I know a few people there. So yeah, it's really. I mean, a lot of the times I'm the one coming up with the ideas. I kind of, to borrow a phrase from Taffy Broadus or Ackner, I consider myself to be an idea vendor. So it's sort of just my nature to be always see something, whether it's reading a book, a magazine article, going online, seeing something and thinking, okay, well, how can I turn this into an article? It's just sort of how I'm wired. So I mean, so I'd say a majority of the stories that you see or come about because I'm thinking about, oh well, this could work for a different place. I'm not assigned stories as much as I'd like to be, though I would welcome it. If any editors are listening and want to assign me a story, please, I'm open. But no, I'm used to pitching, and I've grown to love it because it's almost like a puzzle. Where can what's the best home for the story, and how can I facilitate that?
You think of it as a puzzle. I think of it as a sales job. I'm curious, what's the key to a good pitch?
A key to a good pitch is has to be concise, and it has to spell out how you will report the story. It's almost like offering a blueprint. It's almost like presenting a blueprint where here's how I'm gonna report the story. Here's who I know. Here's why it's a good fit for your publication. Here's why I'm the person to do it. And once it's very much like a blueprint or an outline for how you did the job. And one of the key things that I learned years later is the subject line is everything. So I think a lot of freelance writers or aspiring freelance writers don't put a lot of attention to the subject line. But if you put writer pitch and then the title the of the pitch as you envision it, that's a key that will get editors' attention. And so that's something that's helped me immensely, is to frame it in a way that it's going to get the editor's attention immediately. And that means big bold headline and a pitch that is maybe 3 paragraphs long, 4 paragraphs long. You have it's very, because again, editors are just flooded with emails. So even editors I know are flooded with emails. So I'm always looking to catch their attention in the fewest number of words possible. And
And
that's really the skeleton key for it.
I'm thinking that there are probably some keywords too that you would put in a subject line. Like, a lot of things now are pitched, at least headline wise, as the greatest or the most amazing or the oldest or the
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, I don't know. I never think of brandishing the subject letter with fancy
Good.
big low words. I just think of, well, what's the headline that will make an editor say, oh geez, yeah, I got to read this. So like for a recent pitch that I did that landed in Billy Penn, which is WYY's excuse me, online affiliate, the public radio station in Philly. I pitched a story about a guy that had worked for the 73 Sixers and the 83 Sixers. And my pitch was, meet the man who's worked for the best team in Philly sports history and the worst team. And that was enough to get their interest. So yeah, I mean, it is a sales job. You're right, it absolutely is. I mean, I'm in sales, whether I like it or not. I have to sell myself, I have to sell my abilities. But to me, it's also a competition, it's a game. And I like the challenge of trying to get an editor to say yes. It's very, very enjoyable. I mean, there's something about it that is extremely satisfying when a pitch lands at the right place. It's extremely satisfying, and I think that's the high that I keep chasing.
Nice. So I would presume that the Coughlin one, did you got a press release for his book or availability or something
That
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 worked
worked
well?
out that worked out differently.
Okay,
That
good.
worked out differently because I was driving in my car. I There was an announcement about, oh well, Tom Coughlin has a new book coming out, and I thought, okay, I thought Tom Coughlin, yeah, well, okay, he has a book coming out. My friend co-wrote that book because I remembered him coming to me about, hey, I want to see, do you have any editors who can help me out with this? My friend Greg Hanlon, who co-wrote the book. And I thought, let me email Greg and see if Tom would be amenable to chatting. And he was. So it worked out really well. And that happened just out of pure luck, because I had completely forgotten about that book. And I realized that, oh yeah, it's out. So I reached out to Greg, and he was very happy to facilitate that interview. So yeah, that didn't happen with the press release. The Lizzie Gottlieb one did happen with the press release, but Tom Coughlin was complete luck almost.
That's how it works sometimes. And with just a scene
Yeah.
set here with him, former coach of the New York Giants, very
Hmm.
revered figure in New York sports now that he's retired. The accomplishments that he had, 2 Super Bowl championships for him, 2 Super
Hmm.
Bowl wins for him. With the Coughlin Q&A, it was funny. There was an interesting moment in that one, and I'm trying to picture in my mind
Hmm.
how it went, where he was talking about how his wife's death, he now needs to get his life
Yeah.
into a schedule where he's trying to create a sense of order because that's how he's lived his whole life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you comment about how liberating that is, and
Yes.
he immediately comes back with he doesn't want liberating. And I'm just curious how that played out and how you handle
Right.
questions and how you handle if then scenarios where the guy might disagree with you.
No, I mean, it's a conversation. That's how I enter in every interview. It's a well prepared conversation, and when something like that happens, it's just like a normal reaction. I mean, yeah, and even though Tom Coughlin has had the storied career as a football coach, and he has this reputation as being, kind of gruff, a little terse. If and any Giants fan who watched Tom Coughlin, who watched those teams for years and watched press conferences with Tom Coughlin, knows that he's not exactly, a
Warm and
kindergarten
fuzzy.
teacher.
Right.
But yeah, he's not at all. But the thing that I try to have this mindset going to every interview, every interaction I have, is that you're dealing with people, and and I try to structure every talk that I have as a conversation, and and if someone has a disagreement, my response is always one of openness. I don't remember how exactly that exchange went, but I think it was but I think I said something along the lines of, oh, well, really, like, how is it? Why not? How is it not liberating? Why? And that's the key. The key is to keep it open ended and to not press judgment on someone. Not and if they do respond like that, to provide the opportunity to get them to explain. And I feel like that's what you want. You want a open ended dialogue, and you always want to be able to keep the ball rolling. So for me, an interview is not an opportunity to get into, like, first take debate, or to state my opinion on something. It's to just offer my opinion as someone who's curious. I mean, if you listen to my interview transcripts, and God forbid no one should listen to my interviews because they're awful in terms of the clumsiness and the stammering. But if you listen to them, the phrase that comes up a lot, and I genuinely mean this, is "I'm just curious." And I think that's how I go into each interview, is that I'm just really curious to find out about what makes a person tick. And I think if you arm yourself with that, and you know about the subject, you read their book, you watch their movie, I think I think you're in really good shape, because it becomes a conversation. It doesn't become, I have these scripted questions. This is, I need to have these 10 answers, because that's not a conversation. That's an interview.
Right.
And those read like depositions, and they're typically very, very boring.
I did want to ask about like one or two things about a couple of the different pieces we brought up. The other one
Hmm.
is the lacrosse one, because
Yeah.
that's more of your traditional feature. It read as kind of an enjoyable magazine piece, the kind of piece you would read in like a Sports Illustrated, or
Oh,
now
thank you.
in the Athletic. And I noticed in particular in that one that you liked analogies, like the Babe Ruth commissioner
Hmm.
thing, which was great. I thought that was really fun. How do you come up with good analogies?
That's a really good question. I mean, my whole thing is to not write anything that I haven't heard before or seen before. I think that's the goal with any writer, no matter what genre you're in, is you want to offer the reader something new. You don't want to offer the same like as structure. Like, oh, he was as scared as a mouse, well, or as timid as a mouse. Well, that's boring. You want to write. You want to have a simile or a metaphor or whatever that not only conveys the information in the most succinct way possible, but you want it to be fun. And that's the thing with writing. With anything that I write, I want to have fun. I mean, there's always. I think if anyone reads any of the pieces that I write, even the trade magazine pieces, there's always something in it for me. I'm always trying to have fun with it, because for people who read this, like, they're not reading, they need to have fun too. They're not, this shouldn't be torture for them. This shouldn't be going to school for them. It should be fun. It should be informative. It should be breezy. And that's what I try to do with my writing. I try to make it as enjoyable and invigorating and as informative for the reader as possible. And that doesn't matter if I'm writing a movie review or an interview or an alumni magazine profile. It's all the same. It's all in the same sandbox.
The analogies that comes into play too with stand-up comedy. It's the same principle, largely.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm God, I'm not a stand-up comic, but I mean, I think I maybe got that just from reading a lot of movie reviews and a lot of sports
Sure.
columnists, where you only have maybe 800 words to make a point.
Yep.
So that's very. So a simile is a very concise way to capture a point in a very expressive way.
Yep,
I mean, Jim Murray was huge with that. I
for
think
sure.
Rick Riley was big on those. I read a lot of Rick Riley when I was, in my 20s when he did the back home for SI. And so yeah, I think I think with anything, I mean, it's a garnish. You don't want to overpower the reader with anything. So I try not to do that. I'm always very cognizant of, or I try to be cognizant of tropes that come up in my writing. I do my best to eliminate them and just be as original as I can each story out.
You made a great comp there, just calling it a garnish.
There you go. See, it's a reflex.
It's 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 natural. That's cool.
I can't help myself. No, we're all wired. That's the thing, though. We're all wired certain ways, and I think if you read any writer, any writer, they all have tells where you can tell, like, oh, this is a Susan Orlean piece, or oh, this is a Gary Smith piece, or whomever. I think every writer has their certain flavor that they bring to it, and that's they should. But again, to use, I hate using food analogies, but here we go. I you don't want, if you're eating something, you don't want to have it just taste of all oregano or all basil. There has to be a nice mix of It has to be a nice mix. So that's what I hope to bring to the table with when I write something, is just, oh, that was pleasant, that was great, and I got everything I needed, but not too much of one thing.
You mentioned movie reviews a couple of times, and we
Yeah.
had a theater and cultural reviewer. This is probably back about a year and a half ago, someone who was based in Atlanta, and she reviewed plays. And one of the
Hmm.
questions that I asked her got a really strong response. I want to see if it gets a similar one from you. When
Hmm.
you're watching a movie, what are you watching for?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm looking at how the shots are framed. I'm looking and how those shots and the camera setup, how that tells a story. I'm looking at set design, because again, film is a visual medium. I mean, it is all visual. So I want to kind of just break down what that world is like, what I'm seeing, and I'm also looking at characters and what their motivations are, and if that feels true to real life, and if there's a universality to that. Um, and I think the most important thing for me is I'm always writing notes. I write notes about what I see, what certain plot devices, certain twists happen, and but I think the most important thing to me is to just be able to have some time with it and sit back and reflect on what I've watched. I think it's really important. I think we kind of live in a time now of instant analysis where you go to the movie, you watch a show, and you tweet about it or you post it on Facebook or whatever. But I think to write any good critical, I think to write well about anything from a critical perspective, I think you need to have it sit in your head and marinate and think about what the movie meant to you, and what struck you about it that's different or the same. So yeah, but it's hard to do that well when you're doing that, you know, every week. It becomes, and you have deadlines. You don't have that luxury, which is, I think, one reason why I got out of film reviewing, was because it was just a really heavy workload, and the pay wasn't very good, and it wasn't satisfying to me. It became less satisfying as time went on. But I still dabble in it, and I still enjoy it. But it's not my first love anymore.
Do you have a favorite one that you've done?
I wrote a review of Spring Breakers 10 years ago that was pretty good, and people whom I respect in the movie review circle, which is more spec than a circle for me. They seem to like it. So that was one that I thought I really kind of got what was going on in that movie and was able to express it well. But it's really hard. I mean, writing movie reviews is that's the hardest writing that I think I've done. It's because it's hard to write critically, expressively, and sequentially in a plot, recapping a plot. It's hard to balance all of those things in one article. It's really hard. The ones who do it amazingly well. The Eberts, the Kales, the Wesley Morrises, they're masters. I don't know how they do it. It's like a magic trick, and it's one that I've yet to. It's one that I've yet to learn.
I would
So maybe,
imagine.
yeah.
I would imagine you're still pretty good. You were still pretty good at it, given the length of time for which you've done it.
Yeah, but you know what, man? Like they these were not. I wasn't writing like for high profile pubs. I mean, I'm proud of the work that I did for Icon, which was an A&E publication that's in New Hope, Pennsylvania, that's still around. I loved working for Trina McKenna, the publisher and editor there. She's wonderful. Um, but I was never. I mean, I was never writing for high profile pubs. I mean, I was. I mean, most. I was. I think the most I made for a movie review was $200 for Deadspin, the old version of it, and it was a fine review, but I never got better at it. And the where I'm writing, you can see, like, I'm not writing for, the New Republic or Slate or Salon. I'm writing for places that, where being a film critic is just sort of like, all right, we have $25, let's throw it to this,
It's a nice
this
to
this
have, not a
dude's
have
way.
to have, kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And again, if you look at publications now, I mean, movie reviews are not really a focal point of the coverage anymore.
Yep. We've gone through all these different things: Q&As, features, movie reviews. Got one more.
Hmm.
Oral histories. I
Yes.
almost never write them. I just did one that had 17 sources. I know you've written some. I saw that there was one that you've done on The Baseball Bunch, a children's TV show
Yeah.
hosted by a baseball legend, Johnny Bench, back in our childhood.
Yeah.
What's your favorite oral history that you've done? What's the secret to a good one?
Well, I've written two that have been published. There's a third that's coming out next month that I think I'm most proud of. I don't know if I'm at liberty to say what it's about, but it's on one of the best NBA teams of all time. I'll just leave it at that.
Nice.
Yeah. So I don't know, I liked both oral histories that I've written. I wrote one for the Baseball Bunch, which you mentioned, which I loved. That was a real time travel piece for me because I grew up watching that show. I used to watch the reruns on ESPN and marvel at Ozzie Smith being on, or Dusty Baker. That was a fun piece. And I wrote another one on about Salem Sportswear, the caricature shirt manufacturers, for Rolling Stone, which I loved. But yeah, the key to good oral history is just getting as many people as you possibly can, and or at least getting the key people, and not just the stars of the show, or you know the the talent, so to speak, but to get the directors, the producers, the folks that were involved in the nitty gritty. So for this recent oral history that I wrote, I talked to players, I talked to coaches, but I also talked to the assistant trainer, the media relations guy, the executive assistant, the folks that were on the floor who had the stories. And I think that's the key to any good reporting, is to get is not to get the names in bold, but to get the folks that work behind the scenes, who were there for 5, 10, 15 years, who not many people talk to, who are eager to talk and want to talk and have fond memories about that time. So yeah, that'd be my advice to writing an oral history, is just
Cool.
to get a good variety of people and keep reporting.
So you wrote a book, From Hang Time to
Yes.
Prime Time: Business, Entertainment, and the Birth of the Modern Day NBA. It's a
Hmm.
massive subject, tons of interviews. There are like 20 interviews with you if I type your name into a search for on in any podcast app, which is great. So let's just keep it to the most basic question here. How
Yeah,
did you
sure.
organize that work into something that could become a book?
That is a good question. What I use note cards. So I went through all the interviews and read through them, and I just, on an index card, I wrote down the main points, and then I organized all those points into sections that became chapters. It was and that worked really well for me. I'm sure other people have other ways of doing it, but for me, going through all the articles, all the interviews, which I had typed out, and putting them down into something tangible that I could look at, it would spur something in my brain, write what I needed to write, put it away, go to the next thing. That really helped me. And I did the same thing for that oral history that I just mentioned, which was, 45 interviews, 50 interviews, stuff from books. The note card system for me works really well because I'm very tactile. So I like to have things in my hand. I like to be able to cross things off and check things off. So the note card system for me was a lifesaver with that book because I didn't really have a lot of time to write. I mean, it wasn't like I was Bob Caro and I had, years, to work on, volume 4 of my opus. I had a deadline that I was trying to meet and I wanted to get paid. So I had to be very, very, I had to find a system that worked for me and one that would work quickly. And that one worked out pretty well.
What was this? What was the time it took from the minute of the birth of the idea to the minute that you held the book in your hand for the first time?
7 years. 7 years.
Wow.
Because the idea from the book came from an article that I wrote for Grantland about Marvin Gaye's national anthem at the
Yep.
1983 NBA All-Star game. And as time went on, I talked to more people about it. It seemed to me that anthem was the pivot point for when the NBA went from being a league that was sort of without an identity, that was trying to ape what baseball and football were in terms of being, quote unquote America's game, to becoming it's doing its own thing. That is becoming a black sport, embracing the culture and embracing a younger audience. And so that idea just stuck with me, and I kept finding stories that would tie into that so I could cultivate more sources and cultivate more information so that I could create a proposal. So yeah, so that took, 4 years to get a book deal, 5 years to get a book deal, then writing the book, and then holding my hand, that took 7 years.
Wow. So patience.
That is the name of the game. This is not a field for people that want instant gratification. And yeah, so I've learned to be very, very, very patient. It's probably my best asset. I can wait for a plane like nobody's business. I can, I am very good at having a book to read and just waiting for something to happen. Yeah.
What are the characteristics besides patience of Pete Croatto and his writing?
It's funny. I thought about this because you sent that question over, and it's funny. I wish my wife were here because she could answer that question for me really well because she reads all my stuff. Um, I think the characteristics of my writing, I think I'm, my wife says this, so I'll borrow her answer because she's far smarter than I am, and she's also a third party. So I think I kind of shine a light on people that may have been forgotten. I think that's one pretty big characteristic about my writing. And if I don't do that, then I try to find something to a well-known person. Like the Tom Coughlin piece, I think is a good example of that, where I didn't want to just talk about, hey, coach, what was it like, when Eli dropped back and found David Tyree, or hey, when Eli found Merrill Manningham on the sideline a few years later, what was that like? I want to find what makes people tick and who they are, and I think that's probably the through line that you kind of see in my writing is me trying to figure out what people are like and what make them go, and that could be anybody from David Stern to the San Diego Chicken to to a director like Lizzie Gottlieb. I'm curious about people more than just their accomplishments. I want to find out what drives them to get to the accomplishments, what the path was to the accomplishment. So I think that's kind of the theme in my writing. And then, as I said before, I think my writing styles, I think it's breezy, I think it's accessible, I think it's informative, and I think it's, I don't know, but again, like those are the characters that I see. Like when I read my work out loud and I'm getting ready, that's how I see it. And I'm probably the worst judge because I'm sure someone reads my stuff and says, "Oh, that's kind of turgid." Like, I wouldn't have kind of a lengthy paragraph there, Chief. I wouldn't have would have ended it there a little sooner. But I do think that my writing is and my storytelling definitely has a certain flavor to it. I think, but I think when I think about it, I think it's shining light on people that maybe haven't had their stories told, and just maybe having a little bit of oomph and jazz to the prose, not being just trying to have fun with the writing. And if someone walks away feeling that way, then I've done my job.
Oomph and jazz. I like it.
Yeah.
So, lastly, your overarching advice to freelancing aspirants is?
I think it goes down to being patient. And I think you have to be patient, and you have to be unafraid to fail, to be rejected. You have to just not care. Um, you mentioned before that freelance writing is a lot like sales, and it is. You're selling yourself, and you have to have confidence in what you're selling, because nobody wants to buy anything from a salesman who doesn't believe in their product. So you have to persevere, and you have to be confident, and you have to be very, very patient, because again, there are some writers who come right out of the gate, and they nail it, and they get it done, and they're in all the top tier publications, and that's wonderful. I don't begrudge anybody any success, especially those who've done the work. But for a lot of writers, it's a lot of trial and error. And I mean, geez, I mean, I was published in the New York Times when I was 30. My first time was I was 35, and I've been at this for 6 years. I mean, my book contract, I signed that when I was 40. I mean, my first byline in my book came out when I was 43. So you have to be patient, but if you believe in yourself, if you are open to advice, if you're open to learn, and not just from the writing side, but from the business side of it, how to approach editors, how to apply for work, how to save money, all that business horse sense, um, you'll be okay. But it's you have to believe in yourself unerringly, and you have to be willing to take the lumps. But if you take the lumps, you should be okay. But I will say this: there is no fit. I mean, this worked for me, and it still works for me, but it may not work for you, and that's okay. I know freelance writers who love doing this, and they want to keep doing it to the day they die. And I know some freelancers who would kill for a staff job. This may not be for you, and that's okay. But if it is, I have found this to be a challenging but a very, very, very rewarding way to make a living, and I'm glad I stuck with it. And I shall say this: this may sound a little clinical, but this can be a very lonely profession. It can be a very isolating profession. You need to get out of the house. You need to go for a walk. You need to have dinner with friends. If you can afford to, you should maybe see a therapist, because you are stuck in your head a lot, and that can be very draining. So yeah, it's you know people make writing out to be the solitary profession where it's just you against the windmill of your mind. But at the end of the day, it's just a job, and people's jobs, have families, they have kids, they go out, they go on vacations, they have dinners out, and you should do the same thing. You're not. This isn't. You don't have to be a martyr in this line of work, nor should you be a martyr. Um, so yeah, that'd be that's my, I guess, my long-winded advice for folks.
Well, I hope that you do write a book about it someday. The show is called The Journalism Salute. We salute you for your good work and ask that you do likewise to close the show. Is there a journalist or journalism organization that you would like to salute for their good work? Ideally, one that you're not affiliated with.
Yes, I would. Parker Malloy, who's a journalist based in Chicago, writes a really wonderful newsletter on politics and media called The Present Age. She's written for Upworthy, Media Matters. She is a marvelous journalist, and she's extremely insightful, and she is incisive, and a absolutely fearless in a way, in addressing the media and addressing politics, especially transgender issues, because she's transgender. Um, that is just that I find awe inspiring. She really is a hero of mine. So she's somebody who I think does remarkable work. And if you have a few a few dollars to spare. The present age is, I think, $50 a year. It's a wonderful newsletter, and I don't think anyone writes with as much insight and honesty about the media as Parker does. She's truly terrific at what she does.
Pete Croatto, thanks for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Journalism Salute. Please let us know what you think of the show. You can find us on Twitter @JournalismPod, and you can email us at journalismsalute@gmail.com.